A peaceful park, an ordinary day, until everything changed in an instant. An elderly man's trembling face froze in terror, staring straight down the barrel of a weapon. Nearby, a teenage girl begged her tormentors to stop, her voice breaking under the weight of fear. And then, something nobody expected. A war veteran, long thought harmless, transforming his cane into a weapon of justice. In the next few moments, you'll dive into an unforgettable confrontation, a clash of courage and cruelty that will redefine what you think about heroism, justice, and the power of standing up. Walter settled onto the park bench, his newspaper rustling as he unfolded it. The familiar scent of freshly mown grass and distant laughter from the playground usually brought him peace, but today, an undercurrent of tension simmered beneath the surface. His eyes scanned the headlines, fingers moving carefully over the pages, yet he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Glancing up, his gut tightened as he spotted a group of teenagers near the park's entrance. One boy in particular caught his attention. Tyler, his lanky frame radiating arrogance, a predatory glint in his eyes as he stared directly at Walter. The old man's heart quickened as he realized the group was heading straight for him. He tried to focus on the words before him, but the letters blurred as his mind raced through possible scenarios. His military training urged him to stay calm and alert, even as the crunch of gravel under sneakers grew louder. They stopped just feet away from the bench. The scent of artificial fruit from vape smoke hung in the air, mingling with the heavy silence. Walter could feel the weight of their stares boring into him. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Tyler's voice cut through the stillness like a knife. "Hey, Grandpa, isn't it past your bedtime?" The words dripped with mockery. Walter's jaw clenched, the muscle in his cheek twitching as he fought to maintain his composure. He'd faced enemy fire and seen the horrors of war, but somehow, this felt different, more personal, more cruel. Slowly, deliberately, Walter folded his newspaper and set it aside. He lifted his gaze to meet Tyler's, his brown eyes hardened by years of service and sacrifice. The park around them seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see how this confrontation would unfold. In that moment, as Walter's steady gaze met Tyler's sneering one, the stage was set for a conflict that would ripple far beyond the boundaries of Oakdale Park. The peaceful afternoon had shattered, and in its place, a battle of wills was about to begin. Walter's breath caught in his throat as Tyler's cruel taunt hung in the air. The jeering faces of the teenagers blurred before his eyes, replaced by a fleeting image of a muddy trench and the acrid smell of gunpowder. The sound of distant explosions mingled with the rapid-fire insults, creating a disorienting cacophony in his mind. In that moment, Walter was both the seasoned soldier he had once been and the vulnerable elderly man he had become. The contrast was jarring, almost painful. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the edge of the bench, his joints stiff with age and memories. Tyler's voice cut through the haze of recollection, sharp and mocking. "What's the matter, old-timer? Cat got your tongue?" The other teens snickered, emboldened by Walter's silence. But they couldn't see the storm brewing behind his calm exterior, the years of discipline and resolve slowly awakening within him. Walter's mind raced, caught between the instinct to fight and the weariness of age. The insults continued to rain down, each one designed to cut deeper than the last. They mocked his age, his race, the slight tremor in his hands that betrayed his nerves.
"Look at him shaking. Bet he's gonna cry for his mommy,"
one of the girls taunted, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Walter's fingers tightened on the bench, his knuckles turning white with the effort of restraining himself. As the verbal assault continued, Walter felt something shift inside him. The fear and uncertainty began to recede, replaced by a familiar sense of purpose. His eyes, which had been unfocused and distant, suddenly sharpened. The teens faltered for a moment, caught off guard by the change in his demeanor. With deliberate slowness, Walter began to rise from the bench. His movements were stiff, but there was an unmistakable dignity in the way he drew himself up to his full height. The core of steel that had seen him through countless battles remained unbroken. Tyler took an involuntary step back, his cocky grin faltering as he found himself looking up at Walter. The old man said nothing, but his gaze swept over the group of teenagers, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. There was no anger in his expression, no fear, only a quiet, unshakable resolve that seemed to radiate from every line of his weathered face. The silence stretched, heavy with tension. The teens shifted uncomfortably, suddenly unsure of themselves. They had expected an easy target, a frail old man they could torment for their amusement. Instead, they found themselves face to face with a presence that commanded respect, a living testament to courage and resilience. Walter stood there, straight-backed and unwavering, a silent challenge to their cruelty. In that moment, he was more than just an old man in a park. He was a survivor, a man who had faced down far greater threats than a group of misguided teens. And as the bully's bravado began to crumble in the face of his quiet strength, Walter knew that this was a battle he could, and would, win. Walter's instincts flared as Tyler's hand disappeared into his jacket pocket. The park fell silent, anticipation thick in the air. When Tyler revealed a small metallic object, Walter's eyes widened in disbelief. The BB gun caught the afternoon sun, its presence transforming the confrontation into something far more dangerous. Tyler's fingers curled around the grip, his thumb hovering near the trigger with unsettling casualness. Walter's heart pounded, each beat echoing in his ears like a war drum. His mind raced, assessing the situation with the precision of a seasoned soldier. The weight of his cane suddenly felt reassuring, a potential weapon if needed.
Not so tough now, are you, old man?
Tyler sneered, raising the BB gun to eye level. The other teens watched with a mix of fear and excitement, caught up in the moment, but unsure of its trajectory. Walter's body tensed, muscles coiled and ready. Memories of combat training flooded back, overriding the stiffness of age. His eyes never left the barrel of the gun, tracking its every movement as Tyler waved it tauntingly.
"You don't want to do this, son,"
Walter said, his voice low and steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "This isn't a game. Put it down before someone gets hurt." Tyler's laugh was sharp and brittle.
Oh yeah? And who's gonna get hurt, Gramps? You?
He took a step closer, emboldened by the perceived power of the weapon. In that instant, Walter made his decision. With a speed that belied his years, he raised his cane, using it as a shield. The sudden movement caught Tyler off guard, causing him to stumble backward. Walter advanced, his cane now an extension of his arm, moving with fluid grace. The teens scattered, their bravado evaporating in the face of Walter's unexpected skill and courage. Before Tyler could squeeze the trigger, Walter's cane connected with his wrist. The BB gun clattered to the ground, skittering across the pavement and coming to rest at the base of a nearby tree. For a moment, no one moved. The teens stared at Walter in stunned silence, their worldview shaken. Walter stood tall, his cane now planted firmly on the ground, a sentinel against their cruelty. Slowly, the group began to back away. Tyler's face twisted with humiliation and rage as he nursed his sore wrist. "This isn't over," he spat, but the tremor in his voice betrayed his fear. As the teens retreated, Walter allowed himself a small sigh of relief. He had won this round, but the look in their eyes told him that this confrontation was far from finished. The park, once his sanctuary, now felt like a battlefield, and Walter, despite his years, found himself ready to stand his ground once more. Walter's breath caught in his throat as a young voice pierced the air, shattering the uneasy silence.
"Leave him alone."
The words rang out clear and defiant, cutting through the tension like a knife. All eyes turned to the source of the interruption, including Walter's. There, standing at the edge of the confrontation, was Jenna, her stance resolute and her eyes flashing with indignation as she surveyed the scene before her. For a moment, everyone seemed frozen in place. The bullies exchanged confused glances, clearly thrown off by this unexpected development. Walter felt a mix of emotions wash over him, gratitude for the intervention, but also concern for this brave young woman who had willingly put herself in harm's way. Jenna took advantage of the momentary hesitation. With purposeful strides, she crossed the space between them, placing herself squarely between Walter and his tormentors. Her chin lifted defiantly as she faced down Tyler and his gang.
"What kind of cowards pick on an elderly man?"
Tyler's face contorted with anger, his earlier humiliation compounded by this new challenge.
Mind your own business.
he snarled, taking a menacing step forward. But Jenna stood her ground, her hands clenched into fists at her sides.
This is my business.
She retorted.
I live in this community too.
Her words struck a chord, and Walter felt a twinge of both admiration and chagrin. He might be old, but he wasn't entirely helpless. Yet this girl's bravery in standing up for him touched something deep within his battle-worn heart. The other teens shifted uncomfortably, glancing between Tyler and Jenna. Uncertainty hung in the air like a heavy fog. Walter watched the scene unfold, his military-trained mind assessing the situation, even as he marveled at the unlikely alliance forming before his eyes. Jenna pressed her advantage.
I've got everything on video.
She bluffed, gesturing to her phone.
How do you think your parents will feel when they see this? Or the police?
The mention of consequences beyond the park seemed to penetrate even Tyler's bravado. He took a step back, his face a mask of conflicting emotions.
Whatever.
He muttered, trying to save face.
This isn't worth our time anyway. Let's go, guys.
With muttered threats and backward glances, the group of teens began to retreat. Tyler lingered the longest, his eyes darting between Walter and Jenna, promising silently that this wasn't over. But for now, at least, the immediate danger had passed. As the last of the bullies disappeared around the corner, Jenna's shoulders sagged slightly, the adrenaline of the moment beginning to ebb. She turned to face Walter, concern etched across her features.
Are you okay, sir?
She asked, her voice softer now, tinged with genuine worry. Walter nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth.
Thanks to you.
He said, his voice gruff with emotion.
That was a brave thing you did.
Jenna shrugged, suddenly seeming self-conscious.
It wasn't right what they were doing. Someone had to say something.
As they stood there, an unlikely pair united by circumstance, Walter felt a spark of hope ignite within him. In this young woman's courage, he saw a reflection of the values he had fought for all those years ago. And as their eyes met, a silent understanding passed between them. An alliance forged in the face of cruelty, bridging the gap between generations and promising that together they might just be able to make a difference. The park settled into an uneasy quiet as the confrontation ended, masking the turmoil that simmered beneath the surface. Walter and Jenna found themselves allies in an unexpected battle, their unlikely partnership forged in the crucible of injustice. Walter eased onto a worn bench, his joints protesting. Jenna sat beside him, her youthful energy a stark contrast to his weathered demeanor. For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of recent events hanging between them.
Thank you,
Walter said finally, his voice gruff with emotion. Jenna's response was a mix of pride and determination, her eyes flashing with resolve. As the afternoon light softened, casting long shadows across the park, Walter found himself sharing stories of his military service. His voice grew animated as he recounted tales of bravery and sacrifice, the horrors of war tempered by the bonds forged in battle. Jenna listened intently, her eyes wide with a mix of awe and sadness. The generational gap between them seemed to narrow as they talked, bridged by a shared sense of justice and a desire to stand up for what's right. Yet beneath Walter's growing warmth towards Jenna, a current of unease ran deep. His pride bristled at the thought of putting a young girl in harm's way, even as he admired her courage. As Jenna learned more about Walter's struggles as a black veteran, her determination only grew stronger. She saw in him not just an elderly man in need of protection, but a hero whose story deserved to be honored and defended. The park around them grew quiet as evening approached. Streetlights flickered to life, casting pools of yellow light across the paths. In the growing darkness, Walter and Jenna's voices dropped to hushed tones as they began to formulate a plan.
We can't stoop to their level,
Walter cautioned, his military strategist's mind working overtime.
but we can't back down either.
Jenna nodded, her fingers flying across her phone's screen as she took notes. Together, they outlined a strategy that would expose the bullies' actions while rallying community support. It wasn't just about standing up to cruelty anymore. It was about bridging generations and showing the power of unity in the face of injustice. As they stood to leave, Walter placed a hand on Jenna's shoulder. "You're sure about this?" he asked, giving her one last chance to back out. Jenna's response was a determined smile.
Absolutely. We're in this together now.
They parted ways, leaving the park holding its breath, aware of the confrontation looming on the horizon. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but an unlikely alliance had been forged, one that would shake the foundations of their community and remind everyone of the power of standing up for what's right, no matter the odds. The park's tranquility shattered as Tyler's gang swaggered into view, their eyes scanning for Walter. The elderly man sat alone on his usual bench, his calm exterior masking the anticipation racing through his veins. Hidden from sight, Jenna crouched behind a nearby bush, her phone at the ready. Cruel laughter cut through the morning air as Tyler and his crew approached. Walter's jaw clenched imperceptibly, his mind flashing back to battlefields long past. This was a different kind of war, he reminded himself. The teens formed a loose semicircle around Walter's bench, their message clear: no escape this time. Tyler's smirk widened as he drew closer, his hand slipping into his jacket pocket.
Well,
Tyler drawled.
look who's back for more. Didn't learn your lesson last time, old man.
Walter met Tyler's gaze steadily, his silence a challenge in itself. Frustration flickered across the young man's face. With a flourish, he pulled out the BB gun, metal glinting dangerously in the sunlight.
Remember this, Gramps?
He taunted.
Maybe today we'll see if you can dodge as well as you did in the war.
Walter's hand tightened on his cane as he slowly rose to his feet. His movements were deliberate, unhurried. He drew himself up to his full height, eyes locked on Tyler's face. Walter said, his voice low and steady.
You're playing a dangerous game. One you don't understand.
Tyler's confidence faltered momentarily, but he recovered quickly.
Oh yeah? And what are you gonna do about it, old-timer? Bore us to death with war stories.
Walter took a step forward, his cane planted firmly on the ground. The other teens instinctively backed away, creating a wider circle around the two adversaries. The park seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see how this confrontation would unfold.
I've faced down worse than you.
Walter said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent park.
Men with real guns and real courage. You're just a boy, playing at being tough.
Tyler's face contorted with rage, his finger inching towards the trigger. As Walter stared down his tormentor, he silently prayed that Jenna was ready, because whatever happened next would change everything. In the quiet aftermath of the confrontation, Jenna's phone chimed softly. Her eyes widened as she glanced at the screen, now lit up with notifications. The video was taking on a life of its own, spreading rapidly across social media platforms. Jenna's fingers trembled as she scrolled through the comments, her heart racing with a mix of emotions. She had acted on instinct to protect Walter, and now the weight of her actions began to sink in. Walter watched Jenna's face, noting the play of emotions across her features. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, his voice low and reassuring.
You did the right thing, Jenna. Sometimes the truth needs a witness.
Their moment of reflection was shattered as Tyler's enraged shout cut through the air.
Give me that phone.
He lunged forward, desperation etched across his face as he realized the potential consequences of his actions being made public. Walter reacted with surprising speed, stepping between Jenna and the oncoming Tyler. His cane swept out, catching Tyler's ankle and sending him stumbling.
That's enough.
Walter growled, his voice carrying the authority of his military years.
You've done enough damage for one day.
Jenna clutched her phone tightly, backing away from the scuffle. Her eyes darted around, noticing for the first time that their confrontation had drawn attention. A small crowd had begun to gather at the edges of the park, curious onlookers drawn by the commotion. Tyler's friends hovered uncertainly, torn between backing up their leader and the growing realization that they were now part of a spectacle. One of them tugged at Tyler's arm, urgency in his voice.
Dude, we gotta go. People are watching.
The tension in the air was palpable as Tyler glared at Walter and Jenna, his fists clenched at his sides. For a moment, it seemed he might try to lunge for the phone again. But as more people approached, phones out and recording, the fight seemed to drain out of him.
This isn't over.
Tyler spat, backing away. His eyes darted nervously to the growing crowd, the bravado of earlier replaced by barely concealed fear. With a final glare, he turned and ran, his friends close on his heels. As the bullies retreated, a ripple of murmurs spread through the onlookers. Phones were out, capturing the aftermath, questions flying. Walter stood tall, his presence a calm center in the storm of activity. Jenna looked up at Walter, a mix of triumph and disbelief in her eyes.
It's spreading so fast.
She said, her voice barely above a whisper. Walter nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth.
That's the power of your generation, Jenna. You have tools we could never have imagined in my day. Use them wisely.
As the crowd began to disperse, Jenna and Walter found themselves at the center of a small group of concerned citizens. Questions flew thick and fast, people eager to understand what had happened and how they could help. In that moment, standing beside Walter as he calmly recounted the events to their impromptu audience, Jenna felt a surge of pride. They had sparked a conversation, shining a light on a problem that had been lurking in the shadows of their community. As the sun began to set on the park, casting long shadows across the grass, Jenna looked down at her phone one last time. The video's reach had exploded, shared and reshared across platforms. Comments poured in, a mix of outrage at the bully's actions and support for Walter's bravery.
I think
Jenna said softly, looking up at Walter with a smile.
this is just the beginning.
As night fell, a digital wildfire spread through the town, igniting hearts and minds with each share. In living rooms and bedrooms across town, phones buzzed with urgent notifications. Social media feeds filled with a video that seemed to capture the essence of a long simmering problem. The footage of Walter standing up to his tormentors struck a chord that resonated far beyond the park's boundaries. Reactions poured in, a tidal wave of digital emotion. Younger viewers expressed shock at the blatant disrespect shown to an elder, their comments a mix of emoji-laden support for Walter and scathing rebukes of the bullies. Older residents shared memories of their own experiences with ageism, their words tinged with a bittersweet recognition of a battle they thought long past. Parents huddled around kitchen tables, conversations now focused on the disturbing scene that had unfolded in their community. They grappled with difficult questions about respect and bullying. Veterans groups rallied around Walter, organizing support and sharing their own stories of struggles faced after service. As dawn broke, the local news station scrambled to cover the story that had exploded overnight. Reporters descended on the park, their presence a visual reminder of how a single act of courage could capture a community's attention. Walter's face filled television screens, his calm demeanor in recounting the events a stark contrast to the chaos his story had unleashed. The reach of Walter's stand grew exponentially. What had begun as a local incident now drew regional attention, then statewide coverage. A grassroots movement began to take shape, quickly manifesting in the physical world. Signs appeared in shop windows declaring, "No tolerance for elder abuse." Schools hastily organized assemblies to address respect and bullying. The mayor's office announced plans for a town hall meeting to discuss community values and safety in public spaces. Social media buzzed with a new hashtag. #RespectOurElders. It trended locally, then regionally, a digital rallying cry that encapsulated the town's collective shame and determination to do better. People shared stories of their own elderly relatives, of lessons learned from grandparents, of the wisdom that comes with age. Through it all, Walter watched in stunned disbelief as his simple act of standing up for himself captivated the town. His phone rang constantly with calls from old friends and fellow veterans offering support. Journalists requested interviews, community groups sought his participation in events, and even national organizations reached out to share his story more widely. As the day wore on, Walter found himself at the center of a movement he never sought to create. The quiet life he had grown accustomed to had been irrevocably changed. Yet as he sat in his living room, watching the news coverage of his own story, a small smile played at the corners of his mouth. Perhaps, he thought, this was the battle he had been preparing for all along. Not one fought with weapons, but with courage, dignity, and the power of a community united against injustice. Tyler slouched in the principal's office chair, the weight of his actions pressing down on him. His parents sat rigidly beside him, their faces etched with disappointment. The principal's voice droned on, outlining the disciplinary measures: suspension, community service, mandatory counseling, and a public apology to Walter and the community. Tyler's ears burned as he heard his actions described in clinical detail. The bravado that had fueled him in the park evaporated under the harsh fluorescent lights. His father's voice, tight with anger, cut through the air. "I don't understand, Tyler. We raised you better than this. What were you thinking?" The question hung unanswered. Tyler found himself unable to meet his father's gaze, his eyes fixed on his scuffed sneakers. The truth was, he hadn't been thinking. Not about consequences, not about the pain he was causing, just the thrill of power he felt in those moments. As the potential punishments were laid out, Tyler felt a cold knot of fear form in his stomach. This was about his future: college applications, job prospects, a permanent mark on his record that no amount of remorse could erase. His mother's quiet sobs pierced through his thoughts, and he glanced at her, seeing for the first time the toll his actions had taken on his family. Outside the office, Tyler's friends faced their own reckonings. Parents were called, phones confiscated, and stern lectures delivered. The group that had seemed so tight-knit in the park now fractured under the weight of adult scrutiny and personal consequences. As they left the office, Tyler's father placed a heavy hand on his shoulder.
"We've got a lot to talk about, son, and a lot of work to do to make this right."
Tyler nodded, the full weight of his actions sinking in. The drive home was silent, filled with unspoken disappointment and looming conversations. Tyler stared out the window, watching familiar streets pass by. Everything looked the same, but he knew that nothing would ever be quite the same again. The cost of his actions extended far beyond any punishment the school could impose. He had lost the trust of his parents, the respect of his community, and a piece of himself he wasn't sure he could ever fully regain. The air in the community center crackled with anticipation as hundreds of eyes fixed on the empty podium. Backstage, Walter's resolve wavered, his mind racing with memories of helplessness and fear. As the crowd's murmur grew, he faced a crucial decision: retreat into familiar silence, or risk everything to break it. Walter's gnarled hands trembled as he gripped the edges of the podium, steadying himself against the wave of emotion threatening to overwhelm him. The sea of faces before him blurred into a daunting mass, their expectations weighing heavily on his shoulders. He caught sight of Jenna in the front row, her encouraging smile a lifeline in the storm of his doubt. The room fell silent as Walter cleared his throat. When he spoke, his voice was low but steady, carrying the weight of decades of unspoken pain.
"I never wanted to be a hero," he began. "For years, I told myself that staying quiet was easier, that fighting back wasn't worth the trouble."
He paused, his eyes misting.
But standing there in that park, facing those boys, I realized something. Silence doesn't protect us. It only emboldens those who would do us harm.
As Walter recounted the events in the park, his voice grew stronger. He spoke of the fear that had gripped him, not just in that moment, but throughout his life. The sting of racial slurs, the ache of being overlooked, the constant battle to prove his worth in a world that often seemed determined to deny it.
This is about every elder who's been made to feel invisible.
Walter continued, his gaze sweeping across the rapt audience.
Every veteran who's come home to find the country they fought for doesn't recognize their sacrifice. Every person who's ever felt powerless in the face of injustice.
As he spoke, the tremor in his hands stilled, his posture straightened, and his voice rang out with a clarity that belied his years. The crowd leaned in, many wiping away tears as Walter's story stirred long-buried emotions of their own.
"We have a choice,"
Walter declared, his words resonating through the hushed room.
"We can turn away, pretend these problems don't exist. Or we can stand up, together, and say, no more. No more disrespect. No more cruelty. No more treating our elders like they're disposable."
As Walter's speech concluded, a profound silence settled over the room before erupting into applause. People rose to their feet in a wave of solidarity and respect. In that moment, Walter felt a transformation. The weight of victimhood lifted from his shoulders, replaced by the mantle of an advocate. The mayor stepped forward, visibly moved.
Mr. Walter,
She said, her voice thick with emotion.
on behalf of our community, I want to thank you for your courage. Your words have opened our eyes and our hearts. We vow to do better, to be better.
As Walter stepped down from the podium, he was engulfed in a sea of handshakes and words of gratitude. Surrounded by the warmth of his community, Walter knew that his greatest battle had just begun. And this time, he wouldn't be fighting alone. Jenna's heart raced as she hit post on a message that would change everything. Her small act of digital defiance was about to snowball into a movement that would test her limits and transform her town. As notifications flooded her social media accounts, Jenna's eyes widened. The hashtag Respect Our Elders hashtag she had created on a whim was gaining traction at an astonishing rate. Comments and shares multiplied by the minute, each one a testament to the chord Walter's story had struck in the community and beyond. Jenna found herself at the center of a whirlwind. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from classmates, local organizations, and even media outlets seeking interviews. The quiet life she had known just days ago seemed like a distant memory as she juggled school assignments, family obligations, and the growing demands of her unexpected role as a social activist. Late nights became the norm as Jenna worked tirelessly to keep the campaign's momentum going. She crafted thoughtful responses, organized online discussions, and brainstormed new ways to spread the message. Dark circles formed under her eyes, but the fire of purpose that burned within her showed no signs of dimming. The campaign's impact began to manifest in tangible ways throughout the town. Local businesses implemented senior appreciation discounts. Schools incorporated lessons on respect and empathy into their curricula. High school students organized tech teach sessions to help seniors navigate smartphones and social media. The library initiated a Stories of Wisdom series, inviting elders to share their life experiences with younger generations. As word spread, neighboring towns took notice. Jenna received messages from youth in other communities asking how they could start similar initiatives. She found herself hosting video calls, sharing tips and resources, and watching with awe as the movement she had sparked began to take root far beyond her own town's borders. In quiet moments, often late at night when the rest of the world slept, Jenna would pause to reflect on the whirlwind her life had become. She thought back to that day in the park, to the split-second decision to stand up for a stranger. Never could she have imagined the ripple effect that one act of courage would create. The campaign had its challenges. There were moments of exhaustion, of doubt, of feeling overwhelmed by the responsibility she had taken on. But each time Jenna considered stepping back, she would receive a message from an elderly person feeling seen for the first time in years, or from a young volunteer whose perspective had been forever changed, that renewed her determination. As the hashtag Respect Our Elders campaign continued to grow, evolving in ways she could never have predicted, Jenna realized a profound truth. Her small act of courage hadn't just changed Walter's life, or even just her town. It had unleashed a wave of compassion and understanding that was reshaping communities, bridging generational divides, and reminding people of the power of respect. In that realization, Jenna found the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that the ripples of change she had set in motion would continue to spread far beyond what she could see. The air crackled with tension as Jenna and Walter faced each other across the table. Their contrast was stark. Jenna's ever-present smartphone a symbol of the digital age. Walter's weathered hands folded calmly, a testament to a lifetime of experiences. As they began to speak, worlds collided, generations apart, yet united by a common cause.
We need to think bigger.
Jenna said, her eyes alight with enthusiasm.
Maybe a town-wide event. Something that brings everyone together.
Walter nodded slowly, considering.
In my day, we'd have a parade, show our solidarity in the streets.
Jenna's brow furrowed.
A parade? That seems so old-fashioned.
For a moment, tension hung in the air. Then Walter chuckled, surprising them both.
Maybe old-fashioned is exactly what we need. Something to remind folks of the values we seem to have forgotten.
As they continued to brainstorm, Their initial awkwardness melted away. Jenna's quick thinking and technological know-how complemented Walter's wisdom and experience. Where Jenna saw opportunities for viral social media campaigns, Walter suggested ways to reach those left behind by digital outreach. Their partnership became a living example of the message they were trying to spread. Walter's stories of military service gave depth to Jenna's modern activism, while her youthful energy reinvigorated his commitment to making a difference. The town watched with growing fascination as the unlikely duo was spotted in the park, at the local diner, and even at the high school where Walter had been invited to speak. Their collaboration challenged preconceptions on both sides of the generational divide, inspiring young and old alike. As their planning sessions continued, a bold new initiative took shape.
We'll call it Bridges Across Time,
Jenna announced, creating a new hashtag on her phone. Walter smiled, nodding his approval.
I like it. Reminds me of the bridges we built in the service. Different materials, same purpose. Bringing people together.
Their community day would feature both traditional elements like a parade and modern touches like live streaming. As they finalized their plans, both realized how much they had learned from each other. Their partnership had become more than just a means to an end. It was a testament to the power of open-mindedness and mutual respect. The town held its collective breath, waiting to see what this unlikely duo would do next. As Walter and Jenna left the diner that day, walking side by side despite their difference in pace, they embodied the very change they hoped to see in the world. The park hummed with renewed energy, a stark transformation from its recent somber past. Sunlight dappled the freshly mown grass as people of all ages milled about, their voices creating a cheerful symphony that breathed life into the once quiet space. Elderly couples strolled arm in arm along newly paved paths, their pace unhurried. Children darted between benches and trees, their shrieks of delight punctuating the air. Teenagers lounged on blankets beneath ancient oaks, laptops and books scattered around them. The diversity of faces and ages painted a vivid picture of the community's newfound commitment to inclusivity. At first, an undercurrent of tension rippled through the crowd. Older residents eyed the boisterous youth with a mix of curiosity and wariness, while younger park-goers seemed unsure how to navigate this shared space. The invisible lines that had long divided generations still lingered, like faint echoes of the past. As the day progressed, however, something remarkable began to unfold. The park, once a place of torment for Walter, transformed before everyone's eyes into a symbol of community strength. New features designed to promote inclusivity dotted the landscape. A state-of-the-art playground accessible to children of all abilities. Its bright colors a stark contrast to the muted tones of the old metal structures it had replaced. Walter and Jenna moved through the crowd, the unlikely duo at the heart of this metamorphosis. They led intergenerational activities that seemed to dissolve the remaining barriers between age groups. Walter's voice, strong and clear, captivated a rapt audience of young and old alike as he shared stories from his military days. Jenna facilitated a living history project, preserving the memories of elderly residents for future generations. As twilight settled over the park, a sense of pride and belonging permeated the atmosphere. People lingered, reluctant to leave this newfound oasis of unity. Conversations flowed freely between strangers who, just hours before, might have passed each other without a second glance. Walter and Jenna stood at the edge of the gathering, watching as the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in brilliant hues. The park that had once been a battlefield had become a sanctuary, a living embodiment of the change they had dared to imagine. In the laughter and warmth that surrounded them, they saw the promise of a future where respect and understanding bridged all divides. The transformation was far from complete, but as night fell on the rejuvenated park, hope blossomed like flowers in spring, nurtured by the collective will of a community determined to grow together. As dawn broke over the transformed park, a new chapter was about to unfold. The once neglected community space had become a beacon of hope, its light now reaching far beyond the neighborhood's borders. A line of news vans stretching down the street hinted at the magnitude of what was to come. Walter's hands trembled slightly as he gripped the oversized scissors, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Before him stood the gleaming facade of the new community center, its name a testament to his unexpected journey. The irony wasn't lost on him. A man who had spent years trying to blend into the background now found himself thrust into the spotlight. As cameras flashed and reporters jostled for position, Walter scanned the crowd. He saw faces both young and old, all beaming with pride and expectation. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about the change they had created together. The community had undergone a remarkable transformation. The once clear divides between generations had blurred, replaced by a spirit of mutual respect and understanding. Senior citizens now regularly volunteered at the high school, while teenagers organized weekly tech workshops for their elders. Inspired by Walter's courage, other elders had found their voices. Mrs. Rodriguez had rallied her neighbors to save a beloved local bookstore. Mr. Chen's impassioned speech at a town council meeting had secured funding for much-needed repairs to the senior center. As Walter prepared to cut the ribbon, Jenna appeared at his side, her presence a comforting reminder of the unlikely partnership that had sparked this movement. Together, they had shown that the gulf between generations was not as unbridgeable as many had believed. With a deep breath, Walter sliced through the ribbon. The cheers that erupted were deafening, a cacophony of joy and hope that seemed to lift the very air around them. As he turned to face the crowd, Walter caught sight of visitors from neighboring towns, their eyes wide with wonder and determination. In the weeks that followed, reports trickled in of other communities adopting similar initiatives. Some had started intergenerational mentoring programs, while others focused on creating more age-inclusive public spaces. Each new story added fuel to the growing movement. As Walter watched the community center come to life, filled with the laughter and chatter of people of all ages, he felt a profound sense of peace. The movement that had been born from his moment of courage had taken on a life of its own, growing and evolving in ways he could never have imagined. Though challenges still lay ahead, Walter knew that the seeds of respect and understanding they had planted would continue to flourish, nurtured by the collective will of a community determined to bridge the gaps that had for too long kept them apart. As we bring Walter and Jenna's story to a close, we're reminded that true change often starts with one courageous step, even if it feels like the odds are stacked against us. Their journey, from a small moment of conflict in a park to a nationwide movement, shows that standing up for what's right has the power to bridge divides and inspire those around us. Yet, their story doesn't end here. It continues through each of us. Now, as you consider your next move, we invite you to explore two other powerful stories that carry the same torch of courage and resilience. Click left to witness the incredible bravery of a young girl who saves an elderly man from a devastating fire. Or, click right to delve into Olivia's intense fight against workplace harassment, a journey that exposes corporate injustices and ignites the Halster Women Against Vanguard movement. Your actions can help build a better world. Take the next step by watching now.